What can we learn by practicing Wohlfahrt's Etude number 34 from his book number 2? Well, like usual, whenever you're practicing an etude, it's important to understand what the primary objective of that etude is. Hello to my approximately 2,000 fellow instrumentalists who subscribe to this channel already, and hi to the rest of you who don't yet. I'm Jacques Gadway, and this is Gadway Violin. In today's video, we're taking a look at Wohlfahrt Etude number 34. I gotta say, this is one of my favorite etudes in this entire book. It's packed full of usefulness because of all of the bowing variations that you can add on top of it. But before we get into any of that, let's just take a look at the etude and quickly identify what the primary objective is. In other words, what the primary focus of the etude must be. Well, briefly looking at the construction of the etude, we can see that it's in 6/8, and it's a stream of consistent eighth notes. If you've been following this series already, you may remember the first etude in this book number 2, Etude number 31, that is also a stream of constant eighth notes. This etude visibly is quite different though. Although it is also a stream of non-stop eighth notes, this one is in a different meter and is way less scalar than Etude number 31. This one rather is built more on arpeggios than just purely being scalar. Additionally, this etude does not stay in a single position throughout. Rather, it alternates regularly between third and first position. Because of these differences, the actual purpose or primary purpose of this etude is going to differ from Etude number 31 slightly. I would argue that the primary focus of this etude, based off of its composition, is actually to focus on coordination. By practicing this etude, you can help better your coordination, in other words, clean up the sound of your instrument and make it so that your right and left hand play more harmoniously together. If coordination is something that you struggle with in violin, this etude is ripe for your practice. At its base level, this etude should not be played with an off-the-string stroke like I did in the opening. I just quite like the way that that feels and the way that that sounds. But really, when first approaching this etude, you should be practicing it with a detache stroke. Let's take a look at the beginning and show what that would look like. Because of its meter, 6/8, I like to take advantage of this and actually really try to emphasize the strong beats versus the weak beats. In triple meters like this, if we emphasize the strong beats, we won't always be emphasizing our down bows, and we won't always be emphasizing our up bows. Rather, we'll be trading off and oscillating because the triple meter gives us this inconsistent emphasis. If we emphasize the first of every 3, for example, down, up, down. Alternating between accentuating down bows and up bows is a great way to develop coordination between the left and right hand. In general, when we can do something that is not necessarily natural for the hand, we can further build and develop intuition for the hand. I always say a big focus in our practice, and what we're even doing, especially when we're doing technique practice, is that we should be striving to create more and more intuition about our instrument. One of the things we strive for in violin technique is to get to a point where we can use intuition to create exactly what sound we have in our mind. So one of our focuses when we practice is not just to build new techniques or new tools for our toolbox, but also to become proficient in mixing and matching these tools. One of the best ways to accomplish this is to change our bowings, our rhythms, and our accents. A good starting place is to practice something in a triple meter and try to create good strong beats versus weak beats. When we do this, we create natural accentuations on a variety of bows, down bows moving to up bows. That's our most basic form of accentuating the strong beats in a 6/8 pattern. So the first thing to do when practicing this etude is to get really comfortable at a moderate tempo, accentuating the natural strong beats. you've gone through the entire etude and have it to a level where you play it very comfortably, it's time to start imposing new bowings and rhythms onto it to further develop your coordination. One of my favorite bowings suggested for this etude is one where we slur 2 notes, then we slur another 2 notes, and then we play 2 notes separate. Now, it's quite possible to play this bowing and effectively accentuate new strong beats, the first of every 2. Effectively changing the meter from 6/8 to 3/4. However, I would argue that you'd get the best benefit from this practice if you tried to maintain the previous strong beat relationships. In other words, let's maintain the idea of 6/8 and feel that the strong beats are still the first note and the 4th note of every measure. It's a very different feeling for the hands to figure out. Again, the different ways that you can think about it and the more you can challenge your bow arm, the more you can develop solid intuition in your coordination. Something to always listen out for when you're dealing with coordination is to listen for what I call double notes, and that's essentially what they sound like. It's when you accidentally hear an extra note. Depending on when you hear the extra note, whether it's before the next bow or after it, that tells you whether your fingers are moving ahead or behind the motion of the bow. If your coordination is close and not that dramatically off, then you might instead hear this kind of fuzzy sound. Which is a similar idea. It just means that your hand is not quite moving at the accurate time. There's no limit to the variety that you can bring to the bowings in these measures, but let's go over an additional bowing that I really like. In this one, we're going to play detache for 2 notes, slur 2 notes, and then we're going to oscillate from detache 1 note to slurring 2 notes. So essentially, we're creating an unequal balance between our down bows and our up bows. We're going to have down bow for slurred 2 notes, up bow for simply 1 separate. These unequal bowings are exactly the kind of thing that help us create intuition in the bow hold, because it's very hard to actually logically deconstruct what's happening, but it's actually quite easy when you have a clear picture in mind to allow your body to naturally find what it should do in order to make this unequal bowing work. If you have some specific guidelines in mind, your hand will naturally figure out what it needs to do in order to achieve your goals. But that's the key. You have to have very clear parameters for what you want your violin to sound like. In this case, I'm thinking about 3 things in particular. I want my rhythm to be consistent. I want my strong beats to continue to be accentuated in spite of them being inside of a slur. And the third thing is I want to maintain the bow placement in a specific part of the bow. In this case, I want to stay right around the middle. Even though we have longer down bows than up bows, I don't want to find my bow drifting towards the tip. As I work through that, just by trying to maintain my parameters, I can feel my bow arm literally loosening up to create the desired outcome. It's like my body is trying its best to accommodate the parameters that I've set intuitively. In your practice, you might find that you need to slow things down a great deal in order to achieve a similar effect. How you go about your practice is going to be really up to you, your level, and what you hope to gain from it. Aside from changing the bowing, we can change the articulation. Let's change the articulation by adding an accent and actually changing the rhythm like is suggested in the edition that I have. In this case, we're going to add a dotted rhythm in each of the groups of 3. In doing so, once again, we're changing the speed at which both hands need to change. By doing so, we further increase their link and the coordination between them. We can change the rhythm any which way we please, and continuing to do so will again further that connection. The last thing that we should do when we're very comfortable with the detache is to finally take the stroke off the string. Off the string strokes are one of my favorite parts of violin playing. At some point they do become easy, but for a very long time they're not. And that's because often we try to overcomplicate them, or we're plain out not ready for them. So before you try to take your stroke off the string, make sure that you are very competent at your detache stroke. The prerequisites for an off the string stroke are that you play a detache stroke with very consistent sounding point, pressure, articulation, and most importantly, amount of bow, meaning your down bows are equal to your up bows. If you can play through this entire etude with very good consistency, where you don't find that your bow is moving in sounding point, then you're probably going to be ready to try and take it off the string. Now, how do we take the stroke off the string? Well, that's just it. That's all you have to do. You do exactly the same mechanics you would do for a detache stroke, and you take it off the string. How far do you put the bow above the string for your stroke? Well, that's going to be dependent on your tempo. The slower that you go, the further off the string you should take it. The faster you want to play, the closer the bow needs to be to the string. Let's take this tempo. At that tempo, I'm going to roughly raise my bow about an inch above the string. Again, I'm not bouncing the bow actively, and I'm not lifting it actively. I'm just being above the string. I'm doing the same detache movement that I've been studying for all this time practicing this etude and etude number 31, and I'm simply taking the stroke above the string. It's not individual notes bouncing over and over again. It's simply doing the same articulation, same movement we do with a good detache stroke, but lifting above the string. If we find that our bow wants to bounce faster than the tempo we've established, then we're probably too close to the string. If we find that our bow is not bouncing fast enough, we're probably too far. In order to find that sweet spot, it's best to use a metronome. With that, I think we've pretty much covered the good reasons why you should practice etude number 34 from Wohlfahrt. If there's any other reasons you would practice this etude or any other etudes you'd like me to look at, please leave those in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and please subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, happy practicing.